What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video. This time we're going to be going over the Magicka Sorcerer for the Clockwork City patch. This particular build is a non-pet build, so no pets whatsoever. We're going to be using Bound Aegis instead. This is the build you're going to want to be using for those fights where you can't use your pets, for example the Mage in Ethereal Archive, or maybe the Warrior and the final boss, St. Ohms, in the New Trials Asylum Sanctorium. So in those fights where you're not going to be using a pet, this is the build that I recommend. Like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over our skills, our gear, and our CP, and we're going to top things off with a 3 million dummy parse so you guys can get a sense of the rotation that I use on this build. Starting things off here with gear. 2-piece Lambrus. Going to be using, both of my pieces are light, but you can have one of these be medium, and I'll explain why in just a second. I do have a health enchant on my head. You're going to want a health enchant because we will be using Witchmother's Potent Brew. Where is it? Right here. Which gives us less health and less magicka overall compared to blue food. You can see there it's about a 15,000 difference, more or less. But on the other hand, it does give us magicka regen, and that's going to be very important on this non-pet build, just because we're going to be using Force Pulse, which does drain our magic pretty hefty. It's a pretty hefty drain. You'll see at the end of the video when I bring up my combat metrics parse just how huge that disparity actually is between our regen and our drain. For our 5-piece, we're going to be using a Julianos, which is a crafted set, so you can go with a heavy chest and then craft a medium legs if you so desire. So the pieces of armor that you can also use on medium would also be your feet, your shoulders, and your head. These 4 armor pieces all share the exact same armor rating, I guess. So you can have any of these be medium. So it all depends on really how your luck with your monster helm or your monster shoulders. If you manage to get a medium divines, then go with that and just craft the rest of it in light. For our jewelry, we'll be using Moondancer. You can use IA or Master Architect. Those are the other 2 sets that give you Minor Slayer as your 3-piece bonus. I have 3 spell damage enchants, but you can replace one of these with a Magicka regen enchant if you so desire. That'll help out your sustain a lot. The difference between DPS between 3 spell damage versus 2 spell damage in a regen glyph, pretty minimal. 3 spell damage will typically win out by about 1,000 to a few hundred, but that's really, at that point, you're really counting pennies, so to speak. Front bars can be Moondancer Lightning Staff infused with a shock damage enchant. You can go instead with an Asylum Lightning Staff, again fused with shock damage enchant. It's up to you. The Asylum Staff is going to give you higher DPS, but the new trial, Asylum Sanctorium, is not necessarily the easiest of trials right now. But Asylum Staff will win out. If you do decide to go with an Asylum Staff front bar, you can replace the jewelry with Willpower if you want, if you don't want to farm for Moondancer, IA, or Master Architect. But completely up to you. We're going to be sticking with Moondancer Infused Lightning, although both of these staves are, in my opinion, about equal difficulty in obtaining. Our back bar is going to be our Maelstrom Lightning Staff. You can go with Nirnhoned or Infused with the weapon damage enchant. Nirnhoned gives you more AoE damage, but Infused will give you higher single target damage, so pick your poison. There's DPS differences pretty minimal at best, especially as a Sorc, because there are going to be instances where you're going to be heavy attacking on your back bar, and Nirnhoned will give you more bang for your buck when you're heavy attacking versus Infused. For our stats here, all points are going into magicka. You can get health up to an acceptable level, just because as a sorcerer you have pretty large shields, and 16.4Ks in my experience is plenty, as long as you know what you're doing, as long as you're shielding appropriately, anticipating damage, things like that. Otherwise, you can put points into health to get that 17K kind of gold standard for veteran content. For our Mundus stone, we're going to be going with the Apprentice. You can go with the Lover. It all depends on your group debuffs. Remember your spell penetration. You're going to want to hit 18,200. So if you need the Lover to hit that, depending on what kind of debuffs your group can provide, go with the Lover. Otherwise, stick with the Apprentice if you can hit that penetration cap without using the Lover. For our bars, front bar here is going to be Crystal Frags. Force Pulse or Crushing Shock. I like Crushing because it gives you more utility. Bound Aegis, Haunting Curse, Inner Light, and Shooting Star. For our back bar, you have our Execute, Mage's Wrath, Liquid Lightning, Bound Aegis again, Blockade of Storms. I have Elemental Drain for the purposes of our parse, but this is going to be where your shield's going to be. You can go with Empowered or Hardened Ward. I prefer Hardened for the extra survivability, but Empowered lasts for longer and also gives you minor intellect, which will help out your sustain just a little bit. So pick and choose. I prefer Hardened for the survivability, but Empowered also has a place in a raid group. And our ultimate is going to be the Destro Staff Ultimate. For our champion points, you have 230 with Clockwork City to put into red, green, and blue. Going to start off with our green tree here. 75 in Tenacity, 75 in Arcanist. The other 80 points can be put in these next three nodes however you want. I have 28 in Shadow Ward, 28 in Tumbling, and I have 28 over in Warlord. You can distribute among those three nodes however you want. That's just there to help conserve stamina for when you have to block cast and break free and all that stuff in bed content. For our blue CPs, again, with the Spell Erosion, you want to hit 18,200 spell penetration. So go over mathematically what your group debuffs are like, what you can expect uptime for things like Alkosh and Minor Breach from Power of the Light, and then just make up the difference in putting points into Spell Erosion. This particular setup is optimized for 100% Power of the Light uptime as well as 100% infused Torog's Crusher. And just I think I'm about 1,000 underneath the penetration cap, but I don't want to sacrifice too much from my other nodes, so that is kind of where I'm sitting. So you're going to adjust how many points you're putting into Spell Erosion accordingly. I have 44 in Elfborn, 49 in Elemental Expert, 40 in Master at Arms, and 75 in Thaumaturge. Now, as I was saying before, you're going to put points into or out of Spell Erosion depending on your group. Thaumaturge, you're always going to want 75 points in for Exploiter, so you can't really take points out of Thaumaturge, but you can put points in if you want to get the next jump point, which is 81. For the other three nodes, if you need to put points into Spell Erosion and take them out of these three nodes, the order you're going to want to do it in is Elfborn, followed by Master at Arms, and then Elemental Expert. The reason why Elfborn you want to take points out of that first is because you're not really playing as high into your crit chance anymore, so taking points out of Elfborn will have a lower overall impact on your DPS compared to Master at Arms or Elemental Expert. And finally, for your red CPs, I have 48 Ironclad, 1 in Spell Shield, 1 in Light Armor Focus, 34 in Thick-Skinned, 56 in Hardy, 56 in Elemental Defender, and 34 in Bastion. You can adjust these as you need to depending on the content. For example, the Maw of Lorcage, you might put a little bit more points into Elemental Defender because you have more magic damage coming in. So play around with your CPs. This is kind of a one-size-fit-most distribution of your red CPs. Other things to take note of. You will be using Essence of Spell Power, Major Sorcery, Major Prophecy, and Major Intellect, as well as restoring some Magicka. You do want to have your Alchemy up to 50 to get medicinal use all the way up to max, so you can always have 100% uptime on these buffs. I don't have enough ultimate to start things off with an ultimate on my parse. We're going to go ahead and build ultimate. As I always said before, you can use an Asylum Lightning Staff as your front bar instead of a Moon Dancer. It's up to you, whichever one you want to do. I will be swapping to an Asylum Staff just so you guys can get an idea of the kind of DPS you can get with the Asylum Staff. I actually do pull higher, at least consistently higher on the using the Asylum Staff versus a Moondancer staff. I do think that the Asylum staffs are going to be a little bit easier to obtain compared to Moondancer, just because the Asylum Sanctorium is actually fairly quickly done on normal if you have a group that knows the mechanics and has good DPS, but it's up to you. The DPS difference is pretty small. I think the largest gap that I've seen was about 2k. So if you're thinking about it, you know, the difference between 30 and 32 is not actually that large. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and start the parse in 3, 2, and 1. So there you go, that was 35.7k parse. If you guys see my previous parses, those are from pet builds, so you can see here that a non-pet build can pull about as much as a pet build, especially in Clockwork City. So, you know, you can do a non-pet force pulse build now that the Asylum staves are out. But there is a big caveat here. If you take a look at our common metrics parse, the regen per second versus our drain per second on Magicka is pretty big. It's almost 400 Magicka difference. So this is where Witchmother's Potent Brew really shines because of that extra sustain you get. So you are going to have a lot of heavy attacks. Remember, this is a 3 million dummy parse. We were only in combat for less than a minute and a half. In an actual vet trial scenario, you're going to be in combat for a lot longer, anywhere between 4 to 10 minutes, even up to maybe even 20 to 25 minutes. For example, on the last boss of the new trial on vet, the fastest that I've seen someone do it is 20 minutes. So, you know, your sustain issues are going to be a lot more pronounced in actual trial scenario versus a 3 million dummy parse. So do keep that in mind when you are running a non-pet build. You are going to be heavy attacking a lot more, so you're going to want to try to find ways to get that regen per second up. So like, for example, adding that extra Magicka regen glyph instead of the spell damage glyph on your jewelry. So that's it for this video. I hope this guide helps, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.